They say that if you dare sit upon the throne of the little people, a terrible fate awaits you, death, in 7 years exactly. Nearly 7 years ago to this day, 3 friends and I tempted that fate. Yesterday, 2 of them died in separate, inexplicable incidents, hundreds of miles apart. We were young then college buddies and ghost hunters with a taste for the macabre. Abandoned asylums shrouded in asbestos, ancient Civil War graves, desolate railways at night, nothing spooked us. Nothing, that is, except for the village of the little people. Nestled in the Connecticut woods, not far from a restaurant called Maggie McFly's. It was a place whispered about on forums and hidden in twisted, half-finished legends. It was the end of our first senior semester, and on our way back from a New York road trip, we decided to take a detour, a quick ghost hunt, just a 20-minute detour. We found the coordinates on a site called Dam Connecticut, and despite every foreboding instinct, we veered off the main road toward the woods. The village itself was easy to miss, only a scattering of miniature, decrepit houses arranged around a forest clearing. Overgrown paths connected them, winding through the underbrush toward one focal point, the throne. Unlike the doll-sized houses, the throne was disturbingly human-sized, its silhouette hunched and watching. We had read about the curse, sit upon the throne, and you will die in 7 years. So naturally, we each took a turn. Laughing, we posed for photos, making jokes about our 7 years to live. I was the third to sit on the throne, and now the first 2 who did are dead. It was on the way out of the forest that the fear truly sank in. It was a foggy night, and our flashlights barely cut through the mist. But as we walked, we heard a soft pattering behind us, something too small to be human, yet too heavy for an animal. Turning our lights toward the sound, we froze. In the shadows, pairs of eyes gleamed, doll-sized but impossibly watchful, blinking back at us from behind trees. When we tried to illuminate them, they darted away with a skittering sound followed by faint, childish laughter that echoed and twisted through the trees. One of my friends, Hannah, swore she saw a figure, a child-sized thing with stumpy, fingerless hands, glowing eyes sunken deep into a round face. She described it in unnerving detail as we hurried back to the car, but the others dismissed it, blaming tiredness or an animal. I stayed silent, not fully believing but unable to shake the feeling that something had followed us home. After that night, we drifted apart, as friends do. One friend became an engineer, another a doctor. Hannah disappeared from our lives, stopped answering calls or texts. I wound up working at a Starbucks, watching the dreams I once had slowly slip away. And now, this. Yesterday, I got the call. My doctor friend was found murdered during his morning jog in Washington State. Hours later, my engineer friend was killed while walking home in Atlanta. Both were found with their hands amputated and blood drained. Late last night, as I was trying to process the horror, a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Hannah standing there. She looked different, paler, thinner, eyes bright and feverish. We sat on my couch, drinking coffee in strained silence until she finally said it. "The little people are coming for us." She told me that after our last encounter, she'd done some research. She'd even gone back to the village to talk to the locals. They told her about a doll maker who had once owned the land, a reclusive craftsman obsessed with creating lifelike dolls. People said he prayed to some ancient deity, binding damned souls into his creations. But if a doll didn't meet his standards, he would sever its hands and bury it in the forest. One day, haunted by voices, he built the village in the woods and a throne for the king of his creations. Believing himself to be the rightful ruler, the doll maker sat upon the throne. 7 years later, he cut off the hands of his wife and daughter, drained their blood, then took his own life. Hannah finished her coffee, her gaze wild and bloodshot. "We committed the same sin, and now we're cursed," she said, her voice trembling. "What do we do about it?" Hannah stared out the windshield, fingers tight on the steering wheel. "I don't know," she murmured, "but we can't just sit and wait for them to come for us." That's why we have to go back to beg for forgiveness. And Osinka, and you think that'll work? She jangled her car keys, her eyes hollow and determined. Do you have a better plan? The truth was, I didn't. But the idea of another road trip with Hannah made the dread almost tolerable. During the 2-hour drive to Middlebury, we laughed, talked about college days, and even joked about what could have been if we'd ever secretly dated. It was comforting, almost enough to make me forget where we were headed. But as we pulled off the main road and parked by the forest, a cold fear gripped me. The warm, light-hearted drive with Hannah felt like a distant memory. Now reality hit like a punch in the gut. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. Hannah, please, let's just go back. Let's go home. She reached across the seat, pulling me into a tight embrace, her voice soft but unyielding. You were the third to sit on the throne, she whispered. That means you'll die before I do. Tears trickled down her cheeks, wetting my skin. I can't let that happen. With hands clasped tightly, we walked into the woods, flashlights casting beams through a thickening fog. It was colder than I remembered, and every step seemed to drain the warmth from my body. Hannah was my strength, her hazel eyes fixed on our path, unflinching. But as we drew closer to the village, a terror colder than the night settled into my bones. Ahead of us, little eyes began to glisten in the shadows, staring out from between trees. I wanted to turn and run, but Hannah's grip tightened around my hand, urging me forward. We shone our flashlights on the eerie eyes, and they blinked out of sight, only to reappear, closer. Then, finally, the throne came into view. The stone seat loomed over the doll-sized houses, cracked and decayed. A withered tree hung over it, its dead branches clawing the air like skeletal fingers. Hannah dropped to her knees before the throne, bowing low. Hannah, what are you doing? I whispered, panic rising in my throat. She began to chant, her voice strange and guttural, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded twisted, like Latin played in reverse. She rocked back and forth, bowing over and over as if in a trance. Whatever you're doing. It's not funny, Hannah, I said, voice trembling. I took a step back, my instincts screaming to run. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in my shin. I fell, and my flashlight clattered to the ground. Blinking through the pain, I looked down only to see a grotesque figure standing over me, a blade protruding from its stump of a hand like an extension of its flesh. It was the size of a child, with a face that was half plastic, half human skin, haphazardly stapled together. It grinned, a sickly, toothless smile, before stabbing me again, laughing in a high-pitched, childlike giggle. More glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, closing in around me. I could barely hear Hannah's chanting now, as my vision swam with pain. Somewhere beyond the small, laughing figures, I saw movement, a tall figure sitting upon the throne. He leaned forward, his face shrouded, but the outline of his body, it was wrong. His arms ended in stumps where hands should have been, and his neck was adorned with severed human hands, strung together like gruesome jewelry. And then I saw Hannah. She wasn't the girl I'd road tripped with. Her face was gaunt, her skin stretched tight across hollow cheeks, her eyes sunken and dark. She wore a crown silver, gleaming in the dim light, and looked more like a wraith than the woman I once knew. The next thing I remember, I was lying in my bed, my alarm blaring in the early morning darkness. My leg throbbed in pain, but it was bandaged. Beside me, on my nightstand, lay a letter in Hannah's handwriting. Being with you made me so happy. I will treasure our time together forever, because where I am going, there will be no more happy moments. The king has forgiven you. Never return and never come looking for me. Love, Hannah. I read her words over and over, each line sinking deeper, like a knife twisting in my chest. Desperately, I searched online, but there was nothing, no records, no evidence of the village or the throne. Every forum I visited was empty, every mention of the village swallowed in shadows. All I knew for certain was that the curse had killed my friends and that Hannah had saved me. I owed it to her to live the life she'd sacrificed herself for. I grabbed my dusty telescope when I hadn't touched in years. I'd always dreamed of exploring the stars, of capturing the universe's beauty. Maybe I'd even start a YouTube channel, share the wonders I'd find. But before I did, I picked up her letter once more, reading the words that she'd left me. Being with you made me so happy. I will treasure our time together forever. I couldn't let it end this way. Despite her warning, I had to go back. To Middlebury, to the village, to the throne. I had to find her. 7 years of life. I had squandered every one of them. But if I had to face the king himself, I would. I'd tell her what I'd never said out loud, that I loved her. And from now on, I would live like every day could be my last. Because today, it just might be.